not winning is my primary motivating factor. I think if you go in and make a mistake, it will drive me to work even harder at home to make sure that mistake doesn't happen again. And like we always think with the horses in their developmental process, if you make a mistake in your progression of learning and getting better, make a mistake, that's no big deal at all. But if you make the same mistake twice, that would totally kill me. But if I'm making different mistakes, that is something that you can continue to learn and grow and be better from. So it's not, it wouldn't be something you're going to pout that you lose. It'll just be once in, something that you're going to be up even early the next day, working even harder to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Welcome to the Practical Horseman podcast, featuring conversations with respected riders, industry leaders, and horse care experts. The show is co-hosted by Practical Horseman editors, and our goal is to inform, educate, and inspire. I'm Julia Murphy, and this week's episode is with U.S. eventer Doug Payne. I'm excited to bring you this episode with Doug. I'm new to the world of eventing myself, as I grew up with a hunter-jumper background, so I learned a lot about Doug during our conversation for this podcast. I always knew Doug's name. I think it's hard not to with his long list of accomplishments, which we'll talk about in a moment, but it was great to sit down and get to know him personally. Doug shared with me his journey as a rider. Coming from a horse family, it was hard not to get into the sport. Once he was in it, like many of us, there was no getting out. At one point, Doug says the sport is, quote, a bit like a drug, unquote, which I think a lot of equestrians can relate to. He also talks about his mentors and the influential people and horses that have impacted his career, as well as how one of those mentors pushed him to get into show jumping, which is now 50% of his business. When I spoke with Doug, he was preparing for the Land Rover Kentucky 3-day event, which he finished 12th in with Vandiver in the CCI 5-star long. Doug will talk about Vandiver in a little while, but now that Kentucky is behind him, he's looking towards the Summer Olympics in Tokyo. 3 of his mounts are qualified, and he'll give us the inside scoop on all 3 of them. You'll also learn more about Doug's training philosophy for both his horses and his students, plus the nifty tool he believes everyone should have in their riding arena. And, as you heard in the intro, Doug speaks about how mistakes motivate him to work even harder. Before getting into the conversation, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this week's podcast, VitaFlex Pro, and share their message. Welcome to VitaFlex, where performance is everything. Over the last 25 plus years, VitaFlex has lived by their goal to provide innovative products specifically designed for the extreme requirements of high-caliber equine athletes. Trainers, owners, and top riders demand the best, and that's why they rely on VitaFlex Pro products, because they deliver results. Every single product is backed by extensive research, testing, and is formulated to help you achieve the ultimate in performance. Visit VitaFlex.com today to browse their selection of equine health supplements, antioxidants, joint supplements, and more. That's VitaFlex.com. VitaFlex Pro, the fine line between good and great. Now let's jump into the conversation with Doug. So how did you get interested in horses and riding?
I guess I was just very, very lucky to grow up in a sort of horse family. My mom is judge now at 2 Olympics and the World Games and every 5-star in the world. So it's something that my sister and I basically just were exposed to early. There was certainly no pressure to ride or, they honestly didn't really care either way, what we ended up doing. But I think it's the natural thing that you're around them all the time that you're probably going to end up riding.
What is it about horses and the sport that's kept you involved for so long?
It's funny. I grew up, obviously rode the entire time, but went to school. I have a degree in mechanical engineering. I really thought I'd be doing something outside of horses and then maybe just riding recreationally. Very long story short, had an opportunity sort of out of college to give it a shot and haven't really looked back since. I think what drives you is, in all honesty, is probably fear of failure. We don't really have any sort of backstop in our deal growing up. My sister and I both, is when we turned 18, our parents would very generously pay for tuition, but anything outside of that was on us. So not much of a backstop makes you pretty motivated to make it happen. So I think that sort of gets the ball rolling, and then you have some success, and then it's bit like a drug. I think you probably get addicted to that, and that becomes the driving force that you just want to be there in the mix all the time.
Who are your mentors? What kind of people have influenced your riding over the years?
Yeah, so we were very lucky growing up. I think from the age of, I don't know, 12 or 14, Jimmy Wofford was the coach for Area 2 young riders, and so he would have played a huge influence early on. And really, I've been in touch with him ever since. As I got going and was actively sort of pursuing the professional life, as you will, I did ride a whole lot with Annie Kursinki, and I would say she would be the second person or second stage there that played just a massive role in development and sort of opening eyes to all aspects. Although at this point our business is nearly 50-50 between eventing and jumping, I was not exposed to it more than what every other event person would have been growing up, the straight show jumping. And so she certainly opened my eyes to that being a potential, I don't know, feeder or aspect of our business life. And I've absolutely loved it. And it, at this point we have a really great group of both event horses and jumpers. And, good riding is good riding. And there's something that can be learned from everyone in every discipline.
And you just touched on it there for a second. You ride in the hunter jumper world, and you do eventing. Why do you like each discipline, and what is the difference for you?
Yeah, so in growing up, I've ridden through I-1 in dressage. I've got a silver medal there. We would probably go to one or two dressages just because our calendar is slammed right now per year. Eventing, that's always been the lifeblood of it. I absolutely love cross country, so that's definitely not going anywhere. And we've had a development path for horses that we've just been successful with and very comfortable with. We try to buy a weanling a year that would be primarily bred to jump, but would have enough thoroughbred that could event. And then as they become sort of 5 or 6 or so, we then tend to sort of route them to wherever their preference might be. Actually, our top jumper right now, Quintessence, he's jumped through CSI 4-star at this point. He's 10 years old, and he actually evented all the way up through prelim first. And I think the basic training that would be offered, for the younger horses, I think the wider the experience, the better they're going to be, regardless what they end up doing in the long term. And then on the jumping side, yeah, I don't know. There's certainly an aspect as you get in the bigger and bigger classes, the margin for error is smaller and smaller, and the skill set that you learn there is directly applicable to eventing. So in many ways, it's actually super similar. It's just a different group of horses, different group of people, on each weekend that might be. But in many ways, like I said, good riding is good riding, and the horses, wherever their strong suit is we will try to direct them in that way.
And sticking to eventing, what's your favorite part of that discipline?
Favorite part of eventing, for sure, is cross country, without a doubt. I mean, that is the heart and soul of it, isn't it? There's nothing quite like, especially once you've got a horse that you've had for a while and you've got a really good relationship with, sort of attacking a course is a lot of fun.
And can you talk some more about the most important or influential horses in your life, like who they are and what they were like and why exactly they were influential for you?
Yeah, I guess the first one would be a horse called Running Order that he came to us as a 4-year-old, and he ended up being my first, then 4-star, now 5-star horse. We also went on to Boekelo in Holland for the Nations Cup there with that horse. He certainly exposed me to a whole different level than what I had been able to before. I'd ridden advanced before, but never on a really legitimately good horse that could be a total player at the top end. Unfortunately, his owners did sell early. So moving forward from there, a horse called Crown Talisman, maybe even touching on Running Order, he was owned outright and then sold. And so from that point forward, we've tried to go into partnership with almost every horse we have here. So nearly all of them we have some ownership stake in. So if they did someday want to, if an owner wanted to sell or whatever it might be, we have the ability, if we do have to sell, that we can roll those funds back into the next generation and keep a pipeline coming. So running order sale absolutely changed our whole outlook on how we operate. But the next big horse after that was a horse called Crown Talisman, and he went again from young horse all the way up through what would be a current 4-star. He was sixth at Samir, which is over in France, and then he was sold, and we owned half of him, and it was one of those things that the price was such that we absolutely couldn't say no, and it set a foundation along with a number of other horses, but to establish my wife Jess and I's life going forward. We were able to buy the property that we're here. It just changed our whole reality of how our life and how our trajectory might go. So that was one of those things that was quite sad, but it opened up so many doors to us. And then from there, now we're very, very lucky. A horse called Vandiver has been with us for 7 years. I've done a number of 5-stars on him. He was, I guess last time there was a 5-star, he was 5th place at Kentucky. And he just recently won the Fork 4-star last weekend. He would be certainly our strongest hope for Tokyo. We are lucky enough to have 2 others qualified right now. A horse called Quantum Leap that we bought as a weanling, and he is now up with a huge help of Susan Drillock. Debbie Crowley owns Vandiver as well. Don't want to forget about her. But Susan Drillock has owned Quantum Leap with us for quite some time. He is a 10-year-old, and he's stepped up to 4-star. He's going to do his first 5-star this spring at Kentucky, and then Starr Witness would be the other sort of high player right now, and she's owned by Lori McCree, Catherine Winter, and myself. And she was at the Pan Am. She was 4th individually in Team Gold. So that group is probably the best as far as event horses, or most impactful. And then jumping, of course, Quintessence. He's same thing. We got him as a 4-year-old. Jane Dudinsky owns him with us, and he's now jumped through a 4-star CSI, and I would expect he too will end up 5-star sometime soon here.
Can you talk some about the most important or favorable wins in your life?
I'm not so sure it ends up being one particular competition that stands out, but I think the overarching thing that we have here going is that almost all these horses we've bought as weanlings. And so to see any of them succeed at whatever level they are, that actually is the most fun for me. I mean, so I could get just as excited about a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old that's winning at a prelim event as I would a horse winning a 4-star. I think if they're really truly successful wherever they are in their progression, that's actually what excites me more. It's not so much like I have to win, Kentucky. Yeah, I would absolutely love to win Kentucky for sure, right? But it's not the be all end all for sure.
And of course, in this sport, things don't always go as planned, and you don't, often win as much as you might like. How do you handle that? Like, how do you deal with that if you're like disappointed at a show or something like that?
Not winning is my primary motivating factor. I think if you go in and make a mistake, it will drive me to work even harder at home to make sure that mistake doesn't happen again. And like we always think with the horses in their developmental process, if you make a mistake in your progression of learning and getting better, make a mistake, that's no big deal at all. But if you make the same mistake twice, that would totally kill me. But if I'm making different mistakes, that is something that you can continue to learn and grow and be better from. So it's not, it wouldn't be something you're going to pout that you lose. It'll just be something that you're going to be up even early the next day, working even harder to make sure that doesn't happen again.
And do you ever get nervous? And if you do, how do you handle your nerves?
For sure. I think if you're not getting nervous, something's seriously wrong. And I think there's an aspect of that nervous energy that is going to make you sharper and more focused and fine-tuned to allow your performance to be best. I would say early on, I would have had more, I don't know what we'd call it, debilitating nerves. Like you'd end up making mistakes because you're nervous. I'm just very, very lucky. We've had an absolute ton of horses to be able to go show and compete. And I think the biggest thing that helped me along the way is I was told at some point that, you're at some big stage, wherever it might be, some big competition that has seemed meaningful at the time. And if you've had the ability to develop the horse to that point, you're going to be able to do that again and again. And not everybody, you're not going to win every single time you go out. But again, every time you do go out, if you do make a mistake, learn from that, make it better, and come back again. So it was just a means for me to remove the significance of the one particular competition, knowing that I intend to be back there over and over indefinitely.
Do you have any routines before big competitions, like say Kentucky's coming up, or even the Olympics, if you're thinking about that, which I'm sure you are?
Yeah, as far as routines, not. It's kind of just the norm. We're in a normal year, sort of pre-COVID. I think we were showing 45 weeks, so it ends up we're just glorified carnies. Basically, we're on the road all the time, and in some ways, I operate best in a slightly chaotic schedule, just because there's not a whole lot of time to think about, one particular performance at one particular day. So no, I think it's just trying to make the most of all the opportunities you have, and just go with it from there.
And moving on to training, what is your training philosophy?
I would say, as far as training with the horses, I would try to give them as much time as possible at all times to figure out what's being asked. I would really be tough on somebody if they were putting a ton of pressure for the horse to learn it really quickly or something like that. But I think you can expose them. My goal is to expose them to a number of either exercises or just training tools, whatever it might be, to help show them the best way to utilize their talents. And assuming that they're giving it a genuine try, I will give them as much time as they can. But generally speaking, if you go in a quiet way and they can figure it out, they actually progress pretty quickly.
And how would you describe your teaching style?
It's probably quite similar to the horses. I think it's my job, if I'm instructing, is try to show the riders how best to listen to their horses and how best to put their horses in a position that they can succeed in whatever it is they're trying to accomplish.
Do you ever find that there's one thing in particular that students typically need to work on?
On the flat, I would say most people don't ask enough, as far as having enough energy and sort of they often on the flat tend to ride too conservative, almost trying not to make a mistake rather than sort of confidently going all in for it. As far as jumping, I do a whole ton of small jumps that would be require a lot of sort of agility and sort of footwork exercises, that sort of thing. Because I think that there often is going to be a time that you feel as if all of a sudden you're in trouble, that, you're in a spot, your tricky situation, the striding isn't right, maybe on a cross country thing, the horse slipped on a turn or whatever it might be. I want to have sort of your get out of jail free, that you can sort of slow everything down and the horses will reliably be sharp on their feet and sort of pop off the ground. And I think often people end up on the too long and strung out and running side of things, that adjustment or the ability to adjust is lost. And then that's often where people and horses get in trouble.
And when you're riding, do you have a favorite exercise for yourself? And whatever that exercise may be, why do you think it's important?
The biggest thing, if you can figure out a way to do it, is get a set of mirrors, because you will have a absolutely free riding lesson every day. That has been, over the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, the biggest impact that I've had of late. It's just one of those things. If you see yourself doing it, whatever bad habit it might be or whatever the perception is, you can be way quicker about fixing it. And I think it's more impactful if you can see it for yourself.
So, why do you think you have been so successful as a rider?
I think the success comes as a result of the people and horses behind you, because it's absolutely not an individual pursuit. For sure, I'd be the one on the horse in the ring, but without a really intelligent and adaptable team behind you that can pick up tiny little nuances or differences, or a horse might not be feeling right one morning, or there might be a little swelling somewhere, or whatever it is. If you can pick up all of that stuff early, it really then becomes not a big issue at all. And I think without the horsepower consistently behind you, be it again through all of the staff and managers in the barn, and ownership support, and certainly family support with my wife and now 2 kids, without all of that, you're not going to be anywhere. So that is the key. Have a really good, flexible, attentive team behind you.
And what do you think is the hardest part of this sport for you?
The hardest part of this sport, I would hate to say this, but I think it's the financial implications of all of it. It's super difficult to keep all of these horses going at a top level, and our constant pursuit is trying to figure out how to make it all work. We're trying to expand and have the greatest group of horses that we can, and it certainly can be challenging for sure, because it's not inexpensive, and but it's absolutely addicting, and we struggle, and our goal is to make sure that happens all times.
Is there any piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Yeah, I would say early on, I probably was not near as coachable as I should have been. And as I get a bit older, you try to glean any little bit of insight from anybody and make, sort of turn it into your own and integrate it. And I would say, in all honesty, I was probably a bit too cocky earlier in my life to open my eyes to all that.
And what's next for you?
Yeah, what's next? We've got Kentucky in a couple weeks, and so be really exciting. Vandiver's going back, and he's been there a number of times now, and like I said, he would be our top hopeful, I think, for Tokyo. But also, what is going to be really exciting is Quantum Leap will be the first. It'll be his first 5-star that he's going to. I think he's certainly ready for it, but it's pretty special for us because we've had him now since he was a weanling, and Starr Witness will head to Jersey to the 4L at Jersey Fresh, and all 3 of those are qualified for Tokyo. So hopefully for those guys, everything goes well. And then looking forward to with the jumpers, we're headed back to Tryon next week, and a focus on the 2 weeks of Split Rock, the FEI weeks, beginning of June. So that's what's headed next for those guys.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode with Doug Payne, and a big thank you to the sponsor of this week's episode, VitaFlex Pro. Learn more at vitaflex.com. You can subscribe to the Practical Horseman podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. While you're there, please rate and review the show. I'm Julia Murphy, and you've been listening to the Practical Horseman podcast.